Good evening. I'm Scott Gray, Executive Director of Historic Sotterley, and want to welcome you all here. We're so glad you could make it on this cool evening here in Southern Maryland for People and Perspectives with Agnes Lightfoot, Gwen Bankins, and Dave Brown. We're coming to you in person and throughout the world on the World Wide Web. The genesis of this event was this book, this magnificent book that Dave has prepared. And we do have them for sale at the back. You'll be hearing more about that because it is an amazing book. The history, the living history that comes through is just remarkable. So I want to tell you about our panel tonight. Agnes Kane Lightfoot, community leader with more than 20 years of service in civic, cultural, and mission-driven organizations. She's known for her strong organizational leadership, strategic planning, and sustained community involvement. She has a long-standing connection to historic Sotterley through her mother, Agnes Kane Callum, who served on our Sotterley board for many years. It's an influence that helped shape Agnes's lifelong commitment to preservation and public service. Agnes currently serves as president of the Democratic Women's Club of Flagler County and as Florida State Correspondence Secretary for the Democratic Women's Clubs. She's led multiple nonprofit initiatives, mobilized volunteers, and strengthened organizations through effective governance and public outreach. In addition to her nonprofit work, she's a realtor with Weichert Realtors Hallmark Properties in Florida. Gwendolyn Bankins, my friend Gwen, is president of the Board of Trustees here at Historic Sotterley and the first descendant of enslaved individuals at the site to hold a leadership role. She's a St. Mary's County native and known for her deep love of community and over 30 years of service in local and state volunteer outreach programs focused on awareness, healing, and hope. Gwen serves as chair of the Descendant-led Day of Unity and Healing and was the descendant lead in Sotterley's Community Archaeology Initiative in June. She also chairs our Preservation, Restoration, and Interpretation Committee. Beyond Sotterley, is there life beyond Sotterley? Beyond Sotterley, she's an active in regional efforts to advance racial equity, serving on steering committees for dismantling racism and privilege in Southern Maryland and the Southern Maryland National Heritage Area. She's a committed law enforcement chaplain, supports the St. Mary's County Sheriff's Office, and holds leadership roles with the International Conference of Police Chaplains. Her work bridges history, service, and healing, centering truth, community connection, and inclusive storytelling. And Dave Brown. The description will not be adequate for Dave and all that he is and means to Historic Sotterley, but he's a retired diplomat and university educator. Since 2000, he's volunteered as a docent here and once served on our board of trustees. He's written books and articles related to Sotterley, including Sotterley, Its People and Their Words from 2010, George Plater of Sotterley, 2014, and the Barber Family, From Slavery Through Segregation and the Civil Rights Movement, 2023. The last he co-authored with a descendant, Donald Barber, and, of course, the Kane Family, his new book. So let's give a round of applause. Welcome to our distinguished panel. So, Agnes, let's start with you and tell us your story, please.
Well, I'd love to tell you my story, and thank you all for being here this evening. And for those of you who are online, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to share what was going on with my mother as she put together this whole process. We call it the Kane Family, Slavery to Freedom at Sotterley. That's her. Many of you know her already. Agnes Kane. She was lived right here in Baltimore. And she was born in February 1925. I think you might want to know something about her and the family. My mother's parents came from St. Mary's County, right here where I stand today. That's my grandmother and my grandfather, Mary Priscilla Golf Kane and Philip Bowden Kane. This is a good picture of Philip Moton Kane as a young man. You know, we always like to see that, don't we? And that was my grandfather. He was one of the most important parts of my mother writing the history of Sotterley. This is how it looked back in 1950 in East Baltimore. You know, we caught streetcars. Many of you know about that. If not, you've heard about it. We caught the streetcars and we lived in row houses. And there is where my mother was with us and her 5 kids, myself being the second oldest. My mother attended Dunbar High School in Baltimore, Maryland. Yes, there's another Dunbar in Washington, D.C., but of course, the one in Baltimore is the most important. Dunbar High School, and that was a picture around the time that my mother attended high school. Now, the good news about that is that I also attended Dunbar High School. So there are many graduates of Dunbar High School in our family. I wanted to share something with you. And this is kind of important because when we talk about Sotterley, we say, oh, it all happened just like that. There was nothing involved. It was just someone who said, do it, Agnes. And she just wrote a book about Sotterley. But no, that's not how it evolved. My mother was working at the post office, the U.S. Post Office in the city of Baltimore. In fact, she worked at the main post office. Of course, this is not a picture of it, but we all know what the post office is like. She worked nights. Every night she would go to work and work at the post office. And then when she got off during the day, after she took a nap, because she wasn't big on sleeping, she would go out and research information about the family. And what did she wind up doing? She said, you know what? I have a lot of time on my hands. Why don't I go to college? I don't know how to read and write. My daughter, Agnes, that's me, she's a wonderful student at Morgan State University, but not really. I really wasn't the very best student, but I was still there. And I would share with my mother what was going on at Morgan. And she decided she was going to take a course. And then she took another course. And I said, Ma, hold on a second. You don't want to take that course because that professor will make you work. They'll make you write papers. They'll make you read a lot of books. Mom, it's not the right thing to do. I know how to avoid all that. And she said, my mother had said this, and I remember this because I had an opportunity to talk to others about it. My mother said, guess what? I'm going to graduate before you. Oh, and I knew that was really something. My mother attended a class, and the professor said to her, which is like threatening words, this paper is not good. She said, what do you mean it's not good? Well, he says it's not original sources. You copied this information from something. So my mother redid the paper, and it's called The Acquisition of of Land, by free blacks in St. Mary's County, Maryland. That's what she did. That was the beginning of Sotterley, because from there, she learned so much about what was going on and our family history. She wound up getting a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1973 from Morgan State University, a Master of Arts in Social Sciences from Morgan in 1975. I'm telling you, she was awesome. She decided, and they offered to her a Fulbright Hayes Scholar, and she went to Ghana. And I said, Ghana Avenue? She said, no, no, sweetheart, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. I'm going to Ghana and I'm going to take this course. And she was just awesome with that. How do we know? Well, we know what we got here. Look at this. Once she came back and she really worked on the history of our ancestors here in St. Mary's County. I'm in that picture too, but it's not my best picture, so I'm not going to point it out. It's not my best. But this is the family members that she got together. All those who said, I am not part of Sotterley. I know nothing about Sotterley. I don't know anything about St. Mary's County. We have a picnic there, and that's it. My mother said, hold it. It's very important. This is where our ancestors were living here on this plantation. And she took, that was one of the first bus rides that she brought of people to Sodley. And this is what they saw. This is what I saw. It was enough to bring tears to your eyes. The first family visit in 1970 with her father. And then she brought, like I showed you a few seconds ago, the bus rider people. And we saw the slave cabin. We don't call it that now, but we all know that's where it all started. And my mother found out that she could document all this. She could actually document it. So we know this is how it happened. We had a family reunion in St. Mary's County in 1981, and she made many visits. You know, I'm just putting a few up here on the screen, but she made many visits to Sodley, and this is what we saw. But like all good things, many good things happened. People began to listen to her. They said, wait a minute, this lady really has facts. She knows what she's talking about. We should save the slave cabin. And as a result, we had fundraisers, not GoFundMe. No, no, we had regular fundraisers, and we helped to save the slave cabin and to, as you see it today, refurbish it and get it up to snuff, let's say. Agnes Kane Callum and Dr. John Briscoe actually were a team. His family actually owned Sotterley at his ancestors at some point, and of course, my family were actually slaves here at some point. So this is how it all developed. And I know you probably heard the story before. Isn't this great? This is how it is today. We're working together. We're working together here at Sotterley's. That's how it looks today. We even have some benches there with other members of the families who were here working and at their ancestors and what have you. I do need to share one more thing with you because sometimes we talk about people, we said, oh, yeah, I remember they were great at one time, but I don't know where she is now. I don't know what she's doing. Well, no, she's not here. But when she was, she got an honorary doctorate in history from St. Mary's College. She got an honorary doctorate. Remember, I was teasing her about just graduating? Well, look what happened. And in 2008, she received an honorary doctor. Oh, that's another picture of it from St. Mary's County. I had to put that picture in because I'm in the picture. That's me. Yeah, that's me. I know some of you said, well, Agnes, when are you going to show up? Well, I saved the picture for me. Okay, but this is what I really extremely proud of, that my mother was appointed to the Maryland Commission for Women in 2014. That is absolutely outstanding. And I am so proud of that. And I feel so good about that. And I'm glad that you're here, that you could actually say you know someone who achieved something like this. And that was my mother. And these are other women who achieved too. And you might notice down below Henrietta Lacks. She was also, of course, she had passed. Her family received an award for her at the same time. That's outstanding too, because we were all from East Baltimore. We were all from East Baltimore, and my mother and her happened to be in East Baltimore at the same time. I don't think they knew each other. I'm not saying that, but they possibly could. They could have caught the same cab, excuse me, to go to Johns Hopkins. Who knows, right? But this is how things come together, and we're so proud that my mother is part of Sotterley. So what do we do? What do we do when we have good information like that? When you have good information about your family, what they're doing, and what have you, we publish it. We publish it. This is just a small example of what we've done locally recently, but my mother published many documents about Sodley and our ancestors. And I appreciate you giving me this moment to tell you about it. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to wrap up and let the others have an opportunity to share their story.
Gwen, can you share
can
some
connect that
perspective
later.
on what this means to us? Because we know it means so much to us.
I don't think that was on.
Mine's on.
Mine's on too.
Oh, it is? Oh.
Gotta hold it up.
For us, it's like stepping stones. She placed them before us and she walked with us on the journey. And then it came to the point of where she left us, and it was now our time to continue the journey. For me, I didn't want any parts of that journey. I didn't want to be here. And she kept calling me here. And I couldn't quite embrace it because my first time here, I was in middle school. I didn't understand because of the history wasn't being taught the way in which you could appreciate what was here. But Dr. Clara J. Small at Salisbury University in a class called From Slavery to Freedom helped me to understand the contributions of African Americans and Native Americans, understanding that we help to build this country and community, and we have a shared and connected history. It's not Black history, it's not anybody's history, it's our history, and we have to learn to embrace it. And one of the most important things is that I remind the kids when they're here that the work that my cousin Agnes did, there were no computers, no internet. She put in the hard work of going to the basements, going through the paperwork, going through all the documents. And that's dedication. So when we get frustrated, when we get on Ancestry, we need to remember that's easy. We can do it from the comfort of our home. Agnes would have the timelines across the walls with our lineage. And I remember when we first came here, and unfortunately somebody found a picture because I was pouting and I did not want to be here, but my mother made me come. And I couldn't understand why my great aunts and uncles kept telling us history. That oral history was because we were not allowed to read and write. And that's how we passed things down. And thank God for that, because we have the documents from Agnes. We have the documents that Dave has put so many stories together, Jeannie Pirtle, the stories of the Platers, Sam Baldwin did the Briscoe Project. It's important that we document our journey together. My story is connected to the Briscoe story. The Briscoe story is connected to the Kane story. We don't separate our heritage because it's our shared joint history, and at Historic Sotterley, we try to share that with truth and transparency.
Thank you. Indeed, we do. Dave, can you tell us about putting this project together? Because this was not straightforward. This was a challenge, and I cannot speak highly enough about this book because this is important history. It's going to be an important document for us here and for everyone studying this. And I'd like to know a little bit about the process and how you approached it and what your thought processes were.
Okay, somebody's gonna have to show me how.
It's on.
It's on.
It's on?
Hold it up.
Okay. First of all, I'm so pleased to be here tonight. I want to thank Sotterley both for providing a home for me to work in and bringing together a panel with two wonderful women who I admire so much for all they have done in contributions. I happen to agree with Scott that I think this little book is really quite an important and precious thing for us all to have. It's important because it records the writings of Agnes Kane Callum and the work she did. And you understand, I think, from what you've heard, why that is so important to the story of Sotterley as a whole. We're very fortunate about a couple of things that made this book possible. One was that she was a skilled historian. Another was that she was doing this work 50 years ago. And that was a time which was just about 100 years from emancipation. So that in her family were parents and grandparents who had anecdotes and vignettes about what their parents and grandparents had experienced here at Sotterley during the period of slavery. And Agnes was able, through her research, her oral history interviews, to pull all these things together and publish several books that focused on the family here at Sotterley. Now, if someone was going to try and replicate that, there were 4 large African-American families enslaved at Sotterley and on the adjoining plantation owned by Colonel Billingsley. 4 with large families, 7 others with parents and children, all which undoubtedly have stories that might be told, but none of them have written them yet. And if you were to start to do this today in 2025, you would have to go back to your family's 2nd and 3rd great-grandparents to find people who had been alive at Sotterley in the period of slavery. And it's almost impossible to imagine that those people have any anecdotes that they can recall today. So the fact that she was able to do her work under the terms that existed at that time, which are not as easy as they are today, and pull all that together, creates an almost, at least from the point of view of this Sotterley community here, a unique story. And I'm only aware of a couple of other books that really look into what it was like to be enslaved in Maryland at that time. So this is one of a very small set of documented information about that period. Now, I don't want to overpraise this book or Agnes's work, because it's not the book that's important, it's the work that went into it. And I must admit that there are many things I wish I knew about the Kane family living at Sotterley in those eras. One example of that is that Frank Kane, who was age about 17 when the Civil War broke out, he chose not to go and enlist in the colored forces of the Union. He knew about it because several of Dr. Briscoe's other slaves went and enlisted. Now, what was going on in his mind? Why did he decide to stay? What was more important about that than fighting to end slavery? That's an example. The other thing is one of Hillary Kitten's, his oldest son, decided to walk away from Sotterley, probably in 1862 or 1863, and go to Washington. Did he know that Abraham Lincoln had, in April of 1862, signed the emancipation of all slaves in D.C.? Was that part of why he decided to go? We don't know. All we know is from her research is that he left. So that's the kind of thing that I wish anecdotal information had existed. I know if it existed, she would have recorded it. But there are things that I wish had been recorded. So I'll stop there, Scott, and I will answer your question in a few moments.
We will open it up to questions, but I've got a few anyway. And I'm up here, so I get to ask them first. For all of you, relative to these stories, what stands out to you as the human story or a human story from it that is most evocative for you in terms of understanding the whole span of time that it covers?
For me, the thing that I always share with kids is the fact that after emancipation, my great-great-grandfather stayed here, and I couldn't understand why. Ms. Catherine, our interpretive programs manager, then explained to me what forced apprenticeship was, where after emancipation, the children couldn't leave because the parents couldn't provide for them. So those who owned them could go to the orphans court and say, the parents can't provide, I can provide shelter, food, clothing, and can teach them a trade, which basically was just, again, legal enslavement. And after those 2 years, when it wasn't okay in Maryland anymore, he still stayed 11 more years, 13 years after enslavement. And in my mind, because I'm looking at it through today's lens, that if I'm enslaved on Sunday and on Monday I get my freedom, I'm gone. I'm nowhere near the place where I was enslaved because I don't want to remember that. I want to get away from it. And one of the things we talked about is think about all they know is Sotterley. So think about the fear. Thank you, Miss Catherine. Think about this is their home. From wherever they had been before, this is all they know. So why would they leave? And that's confirmed because when they moved off of Sotterley, they moved just down the road from the Briscoes. So they stayed here. My great-grandfather was free, Sam Kane. He was born here, but he was free. He moved to California after he left the home in Hollywood. He married my great-grandmother and moved to around Rue Purchase Road, across from the Wawa there. But his home resembled Sotterley. So for me, my thoughts of enslavement, my thoughts of freedom don't compare to what my ancestors were. So as we learn about history, we learn that we must pivot and look through their eyes and reflect back at what life was like during that time, not what we're experiencing now. So for me, that's one thing that really I hold every time I speak to children here at Sotterley.
Agnes, are there any stories, any people that stand out to you?
One of the stories that stands out, well, first of all, let me tell you that my mother learned so much from her father. Why did she learn so much from her father? Because he, pardon me, he took care of his grandmother. He took care of her, and the grandmother would tell him stories about what had happened even before she reached America. So he learned that, and he remembered that as a young man. And maybe that gave him and my grandmother the courage to get on a boat and go to the city of Baltimore once they married. Who knows what really got them started, but they invited the rest of the family to come along.
Well, I have no personal involvement in slavery at all. It's very hard for me to put myself in the place of people who did have to endure that. And I know all the various stories about the choices that enslaved people had to make about whether to try and escape or whether that risk was too great and you were better off staying. Well, similar choices existed, I presume, immediately after emancipation. And all I can do is try and understand why a family, and I think this was the more typical experience from what I've read, why they would stay in one place for a period of time before moving on. Was it to earn enough income to buy the house that they had to go to? Was it the need to find the experience of living free? I don't know the answers, but here again are those questions that I wish anecdotal information had survived through Agnes's work. Thank you.
Wait for Agnes to come back because I want to ask her a question.
No chance of me leaving.
There you go. Good. Okay. When you were growing up, before your mother got her interest in this history. Did you hear anything about these stories? Were they family lore, or how did that come about? And the reason I'm asking is that sometimes generational tragedy, we try to avoid that. And no one can argue that the whole era of enslavement was not multi-generational tragedy at the very least. So was it out there or not? Was it just not talked about?
Oh, no, it was talked about. But guess what? It was my sister and brother, Martin and Martina, who were the ones who were really interested in the genealogy and the history. And I was just sort of on the sidelines, listening to the stories about it. But they took over. In fact, my brother was part of the board here at one time. They took over in terms of doing additional research. If my mother would mention something and they wanted to make sure it was fact or whatever, because she was really uh, serious about getting facts and not just rumors, they would look it up. My grandfather would tell my mother things, and she would also verify that that's the way it was. And we listened to my mother because she was a storyteller. She could tell a story. I mean, you could not believe some of the things she would tell you, and you would not on a normal basis be interested. She also visited cemeteries to get research about people who had passed on before, and be able to document that information. The other thing that was really important is that my mother became so interested and so valuable to St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church in Baltimore that she wrote a history for it and was part of the tours. So if you came here from, let's say, New Jersey or New York with a group of people and you wanted to get a tour of that church, she would also be the one to do it. Why was that so important? Because her grandfather was buried there. He had his funeral there. And of course, he was from St. Mary's County.
And I want to add one thing. There's a new word created because of Agnes and the way she handled me. It's called voluntold. Okay. It is when you graduate from college and you know what you're going to do, and your cousin tells you you're going to do something. You're like, Then your mother says, oh, yes, you are. And then it's just like, you're sitting here like you're an adult. You graduate from college. Out of respect, because of the way that I was raised, you do what your elders tell you. So voluntold came into my world. And I was voluntold a lot of times, to be here at Historic Sotterley when it was not in my plans. I was one and done. I wasn't coming back. Even though I learned and I had embraced it, but it was a fifth grade STEM student that was excited about my family's history. What did they eat? What did they wear? What was the day like? I needed an attitude adjustment. So that pivot and that voluntold through the eyes of a child, we often have to change the way that we look at things. So for those of you who do things out of respect for elders, it's called voluntold. That's
And
what it's called.
That's what's, and it's a very good thing to do because otherwise you can get in real trouble. Well, let's open it up for questions from the audience here, and then we'll get to questions that we might have from online.
I just have one question and one speculation. Is there any documentation or either anecdotal history of any slaves or slave families that were sold down the river? That would be my question. And to the speculation about why would slaves stay here, is my understanding that a lot of times after the emancipation, I'm talking about in 65, not 63, that a lot of families were separated and some of them were sold down the river. And they did a lot to try to find these people. And they probably thought in some cases, they may be easier to find if they stayed in place or stayed near the place of their plantation. But I just wondered if there was any documentation or anecdotal evidence of any families being sold down the river from here.
I think our interpretive programs manager, Catherine, would be a great person to answer that question.
So we have a couple. Oh.
Gotta get in camera view.
I get, and this, boys and girls, is an example of being voluntold.
Yes, it is. Over here on the black line, dear.
So I'm gonna hide right up here. So what we have is a couple of circumstances where we have what's called the GU 272 project, which relates to before the Civil War in the 1830s when the Jesuits sold their enslaved to plantations in Texas and Louisiana, much further south. That relates to a lot of the families connected to Sotterley because many of the enslaved families were across plantations in the area, including on the Jesuit-owned facilities and sites. And so many of them have ancestry that stretches across not only Maryland and the Tidewater region and into Virginia, but further south as well. We do have stories pertaining to enslaved from Sotterley during the time of the Civil War, including some of the ones Dave referenced with the stories of those who left Sotterley during that time, who joined the U.S. colored troops. They and their spouses left Sotterley and went with the Union. One of those stories is George Washington Briscoe / George Washington Barnes, who joins the U.S. Colored Troop Regiment. And he ends up after the war in a place called Indianola, Texas, as a soldier. And I believe it's a cholera outbreak that he dies from. And then we kind of follow his wife's story as well. But our descendants are connected to a lot of to the Deep South, and as you're mentioning, going downriver. Because that was a part of the domestic and internal slave trade as well that took place throughout much of the post-war of 1812 through Civil War era.
I wonder if I could make a comment. I'm not aware that during the period of Dr. Briscoe's ownership of the plantation, that any of the members of the Kane family or the other families that were here from roughly 1850 through emancipation were sold by the Briscoes during that period. I have not done absolutely detailed research, but I've been always alert to any stories about this. And I'm only aware of one instance earlier on when Dr. Briscoe did sell an individual slave to people in the South. I don't know what the circumstances of that were, but that's the only example that I know that's associated with the Briscoe family. And that's quite different from joining the colored forces of the Union. That's voluntary departure for a purpose.
If I might follow up, I think one of the censuses from Sotterley indicated it was a 16-year-old girl named Martha who was sold to a trader, and that was the end of the story for Martha. But in my research and interviewing people, I know that after the Civil War, there were families named Briscoe who knew that they were from St. Mary's County and returned to St. Mary's County because they knew they had family here. And you don't have the firsthand knowledge that Agnes Kane had from talking to grandparents and so forth, but you asked about speculation. And you have to wonder, how would somebody from down south named Briscoe know that they had family in, of all places, St. Mary's County? And I've always thought the answer was because they were sold from Sotterley down south. And in their family, there was the oral history. You're a Briscoe from St. Mary's County. You're a Briscoe from Sotterley. Don't forget it. And that was the oral history in that family, similar to what Agnes Kane and her father and grandfather passed down. So it's speculation. I agree with Dave Brown. I think in all the records at Sotterley, there's only one record, a 16-year-old girl. But even that begs a question. Why was a 16-year-old girl sold down south? And did she have a child? And was that child Dr. Briscoe's? You can only speculate, but you know, in speculating, you look at other places, like all the documentation at Monticello.
Interestingly enough, and I just became aware of this within the last year and a half, just like Clara Barton had her missing soldiers office with a trying to find information on soldiers that they lost information on, where she was able to find over 22,000 soldiers. A lot of the slaves or enslaved people after the emancipation did actively try to find family members that were sold down the river. They some of them actually hired people to look for them. Some of them put in newspaper articles and what have you. In fact, there was a book recently written on it, and I apologize for not knowing the title. So some of these enslaved people after emancipation that were not sold down the river did have a concerted effort to try to find some of their long lost relatives. And that's one reason why I was speculating that some of those that stayed may have stayed, because that may make them easier to find.
I think that's a reasonable conclusion based on the evidence that we have. And that's something that's certainly worth exploring. Who's got a question?
So my name is Nicola Williams. I come from a long line of people from St. Mary's County, and I've been on my own personal journey of discovery here at Sotterley for the last year. And I've had an opportunity to be voluntold by Gwen and voluntold by Catherine. I love you. And I've had an opportunity to work with the children that come here on field trips and, during spring break and all kinds of things. And this is for all 5 of you. And Nancy, if you want to answer too, what message or feeling would you want children to walk away from when they come here for a visit? I'm a retired teacher, so children are my thing. So I want to know that.
For me, also as an educator, it's empathy. It could be, it's a universe of things, but if we can speak to their heart, we've succeeded at least in part, and it started the journey for them.
I had an African-American AP class, and they were afraid that the history was going to be erased. And I said, understand this, baby. Somebody lived it, somebody experienced it, somebody witnessed it, and somebody wrote about it. You can never erase history. So for me, understanding that we must keep talking about our history and sharing about our history, because there should not be a fear of history. There should only be an understanding of how we can look back, get the good part, acknowledge the bad part, and then move forward and do better and be better.
I would love for the children who come here to be able to look at this facility and hear the stories and say, I could do that too. I could write something about my family. I could write something about what Uncle John or Aunt Mary told me and have it documented so that the family could keep it going for years to come. I think that would be the better message, and that it was all types of people here. You know, we just can't have the big house, the people in the big house. We need to talk about the slave cabin as well. Not so much from the horrible things, but the way that they lived and the way that they had the courage to pick themselves up and keep things going and making them better. There were many things that came from that we don't like to talk about. But you know, you could not live in a little cabin like that and things be grand. But you could be learning something, maybe from the others, or like some of our ancestors learned some crafts. So I just think That's the message that we should get across to the kids. And we need to do it all the time, not just, oh, we got Juneteenth coming up, we're going to tell them something. And then, oh, it's October, we're going to tell them something about ghosts. No, we need to do it all the time when they come. Have the message consistent.
I'd like to endorse what Scott said about hoping they leave with a sense of empathy for people unlike themselves. I also hope they would leave with an open mind. You don't know what biases they may have arrived with, but I would hope when they leave, they would say, if we're going to get to the bottom of these stories and understand it from different people's perspectives, we have to keep an open mind. And that's the way truth will eventually become known.
So as the interpretive programs manager here, I have the honor of working with so many of our K through 12 programs. And I think the message for me is to hear the stories. We have a student service learning program here with 8th graders from 2 of the middle schools here in the county. And the students submitted letters to us following a month of field trips. And the reaction I had to these letters is it made me see that we were doing something right. And what part of this program is people, descendants like Jan and Gwen, Nicola and myself, we sit down and talk to students about our descendant journey. And letter after letter said that was their takeaway, was hearing people who are alive today with this real connection to the past. We tend to look at history oftentimes through what I call the Star Wars lens. It happened long ago and far away. And that's not the case. The past has a legacy. And our descendants are that legacy, sharing those stories, sharing that knowledge, sharing these histories with us. And for the students to connect with the human-centric history is the most powerful thing. And letter after letter said, we aren't getting that at our other field trip sites. We got it here. And that to me that's what I want students to take away is the personal history, the human history, the real history, and the people that are alive today that are connected to that.
Catherine, let's take some of the online questions.
So we have a great question online, and this may be for some of you guys on the panel here, but there may be a couple of people in the audience who can chime in. It's about the evolution of our descendant program. How is it that we have this initiative where descendants of enslaved and descendants of owners come together? What is the history of that? And Agnes Lightfoot, you touched on it with talking about the relationship between your mother and John Hanson Briscoe, but can we get a little more in depth about that background and the evolution of that program?
I think Nancy, sitting back there, would be the best person to answer that question. That's voluntold.
Geez, I'm
Nancy.
trying to be in the back.
Just trying to exercise the Agnes
Dang
Act.
it. Okay.
For those of you who don't know, Nancy is my predecessor as executive director.
They just were trying to make me say something here. You know, it's to be up here with all of these people that I love so much. It's an honor. The Descendants Project started with Agnes and John Hanson. It just wasn't formalized yet. Having these two people that started with such incredible respect for each other and a belief that both of their stories mattered set in motion what the Descendants Project became. We watched more and more descendants becoming involved. And when we dedicated and had an exhibit put in the slave dwelling and the slave cabin, and we ended up having a formal dedication of our Descendants Project. Over time, we have over 300 self-identified descendants part of this, but it's descendants from the 20th century stories, the 19th century, the 18th, and the 17th. Any connection here to Sotterley and the place that evolved, this site and the stories that we interpret are the whole range of American history. Before 75 years, we're celebrating the 250th, 75 years before this nation was a nation, the story started here. And truly before that, because of the fact that we had the Native American stories. We just don't have all as much information as Historic St. Mary City does. So we don't fully interpret that the same way, but absolutely they were here first. And Sotterley's history is all of these stories. But what makes our Descendants project, and I still say our because my heart will be here forever. It's yours, Scott, sorry. Good. But Sotterley is all of our site. It belongs to all of us. And what makes this site's descendants unique is it's the only site with descendants from all 300 years and from all aspects of the story, and that all come together. We've got a multitude of descendants, both online and in the room tonight, not just up here in the front. And to have that genesis of these two people who bravely stepped forward when this was not being done in the 1990s and stepped forward and said, these stories matter. And from that moment on, and they were both board members, there have been descendants on the Sotterley board since the 1990s, but became formalized in 2017. And then we have what is today. So quite incredible. So sorry for being up here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
More questions here? Do you have any more online?
Yes, we have one online about our work collecting more material for our archives pertaining to the families connected to Sotterley. How do we go about getting new information? How do we go about adding more to our archives? And so I'm going to let you guys take that away.
Yes, we are now collecting, or well, we have been ongoing, really, collecting information so that we can put together an awesome display so that when we come together, we can show the history of this program. So the way we are doing it is through our main office here, through me as well in Florida, because I don't live in Maryland anymore, and other units around the area. So please do that. If you have information, please send it to us. Thank you.
I would say one, if you know, like my relatives here that are not registered yet, tonight, I ask you to register. Voluntold again. It is important that everyone's story is told, whether you lived or labored here. We need the information. You have the stories. You have seen the site grow. That's how the story continues. Through the archaeology dig, we discovered over 2,500 artifacts. That was an incredible experience. And we had about 30 descendants here when we launched the project. And it was hot and humid, but some of us were out there digging in that dirt. And it is important that descendants are engaged. This year's Day of Unity and Healing, it is the celebration, the UNESCO celebration for those who survived or died during the transatlantic slave trade. And a few years ago, my comment to the staff was like, I love it when people celebrate us, but can I give it a little bit of steroids? I thought it was going to be one and done. That wasn't it. So this is about the 4th or 5th year. And this year, the theme is through descendant eyes. So we have descendants who are going to be sharing their story. We have some frontline workers that are going to be talking about what it is to be responsible for the story. Some of them started as interns. And the Friday before the Saturday celebration, August 22nd, is the big normal annual Interfaith Day of Unity and Healing. But on the 21st is a Descendant Empowerment Day to teach individuals how to talk about their stories, how to communicate with integrity, a museum studies 101, so you understand what it is to communicate with a historic site. You can't just give them a list of this is what I want. There are things and rules that you need to understand about collections. There are so many things. So we want to empower our descendants, but we need you to engage with us. And you don't have to be from Historic Sotterley. You're a descendant of somewhere. So Historic Sotterley is that safe place for you to come and learn. Trust me, I've been learning over 50 years here on this site, and every day I learn something new. It's always something. The land tells a story in itself. Our workers here, our team, they are the caretakers of history. The site is here because of those who take care of our stories, and we need you to be a part of that. If you have photos, if you have stories, whether you work or live, I ask that you please share that with us, because if I see you, I'm going to ask you for it, and I will get your name and contact information. So that's how we do that. We pass it along. We need our family to come here, and that means community. We have a beloved community that expands. It's immersive. This is the American story. It's not just Hollywood, Maryland. This is our connected and shared American history, and we need you to be a part of it.
And
Thank you.
I want to add to that, that when people think archives, they think actual paper documentation. Archival resources can also include oral histories, those anecdotal stories that serve to bring history to life in a human way. And there's the validity in them. And some of people know I will die on that hill fighting for oral histories as a primary source. And we want you to share those stories, and so we can add them into our digital archives so that they can live on and continue to be a resource for other historians, genealogists, and students.
Thank
I can
you.
just add
Go ahead.
one thing. It's not just when people donate stuff. Every time Sotterley gives a program of any kind, it needs to generate content by inviting people to come and give talks, by doing research, and all of that content gets saved in one form or another. Now, organizing it into an archive is different than just saving it. And that's an area where I think much more needs to be done by Sotterley. But just understand that every time you participate in a program here, you're contributing to the expansion of the knowledge that Sotterley has.
And that is a perfect lead into what I'll talk to about in just a minute, Dave.
Okay.
But first, let's have a round of applause for this was extraordinary. The insights that we got this evening will actually go into our work. It expands what we can do. And speaking of programs, I said, Dave will be here next Thursday, the 25th, for a talk on Sotterley. What's it going to be on? George Plater III. He gets me confused because he is such a man of many worlds. He understands so much. And there is it's a free program, but there is a wine tasting with the Port of Leonardtown Winery, $20 for that evening. So come and enjoy yourself. Also want to remind you that next week, June 19th, this Friday, this Friday, coming up on us already, Juneteenth, and Threads of Freedom. It's only in person from 3:30 to 7 right here. We have coming up July 1st, another People and Perspectives with John Garrison Marks. We'll be talking about George Washington and slavery. Saturday, July 11th, we're going to have our second family night, which is a lot of fun. We had it Saturday night, music, food. You can go see our goats and our miniature sheep and just enjoy yourself. And then on July 18th, 2:00 here, we're going to have a 1776 tea party. And the talk will be about George Washington's spies. So it's going to be a nice afternoon, nice evening, or afternoon affair. I want to reiterate what Gwen and Dave have said about being involved at Sotterley. We are able to do this because of the support of folks like you. I like to say give early, give often, but I'm not kidding. We rely on our community to ensure that we're out here telling the truth, making sure that these stories get told, that they're not swept under a rug and they're not hidden away. They're out there for people to learn and to make judgments about. And We think that's an important thing these days. So you can go online to sotterley.org /donate. You can volunteer with us. You can come to our events. And we especially like just being able to see all of you because you brighten our days, our evenings, and you bring vitality to this place. It's not just a historic site. It's not a stone museum. It's a place of life, and that's life that you all bring to it. So thank you for coming tonight and bringing us life. And we have still some refreshments, I think, back there, certainly cold water, which we all can use. And we hope to see you Friday and next week and day after day. Thanks a lot. The book is available for sale at the table back there. And I think that we might have some folks up here who could be prevailed upon to sign your copy.